Hello everybody and welcome back to Hyperlight Drifter. I am Bacter, and thanks to a cold, I'm about an octave lower than usual. I hope you are as excited as I am for this, the beginning of the southern area, the last of the radial regions that we haven't explored yet. We had a lot of fun with our rainbow-colored coat, but we're going to go with the purple and red ensemble. You get this for defeating the arena, and while it has no actual gameplay benefit, it makes it so that any enemies that you kill always have the decapitation animation, which you could normally only get from doing a big swing. So, even if we don't use the big swing, they'll act like we did. Additionally, I find the ensemble to be very cool in sort of a hot topic-y kind of way, I guess. Whatever, I think it's neat. Anyway, there are just a few things we want to cover before heading south. We've looked at almost everything in town, but one area shines out, glowing with baleful malevolence, and it's not this sleeping lizard man, even though he's pretty cool. No, it's an area down south, an area that perhaps radiates with pain, fear, and all other kinds of negative emotions. That's right. It's the soccer pitch, and that is the soccer goblin. We're nowhere near strong enough to begin taking him on yet, but I just thought I'd introduce him for a second. This is to be the site of our final and most glorious battle coming up, but for now, it will have to wait as we head south. I like that you can sort of talk to guards a little bit, and they give you just a little shrug. I don't know what to talk about. Anyway, as before, you pass through this sort of liminal, ruined suburbs area, which the South, no less than any of the other areas, has clearly seen the ravages of age and some kind of wartime catastrophe. We entertained the notion in the last area, the eastern area, that perhaps this world suffered an invasion, is what in particular went on. We saw the crystal raccoons fighting against it, and we wondered if it might have come from the southern suburbs, but if it did, then the suburbs here were no less affected. We will be running out of things to spend our pieces of 8 and doubloons on in the southern area. There are more doubloons in the game and more pieces of 8 than there are upgrades to buy, which I actually appreciate because it means that if you actually want to be a completionist and get all of the gear bits or whatever, then you are doing that only because you want to be a completionist and not because you want all the gear. In other words, you can go through, as I'm sure that I have, missing 1 or 2 gear bits as you go through the game, and still end up with every gameplay-oriented benefit. Now, there's still gear bits to be got out there, and if you're an achievement fanatic, if you need your Chivos, then you can go back and get those. I don't care so much, so I'm not going to be messing with that too much. We will, as I said before, get everything major. Get all of the monoliths, get all the major modules, but we don't care about gear bits. So, some trees, bringing to mind the western area. A lot more discarded hulks. I always try to avoid talking too much in depth about what we see along the way, because that's really the point of the in-depth video. But do notice those stationary defense platforms like what we saw in the western area there. So the same tech was available to the multiple suburb areas. And here we begin to see the character of the southern region. It's deserty and has a very orange palette. The 4 areas, as we've discussed before, are very visually distinct. Here's me failing that timed challenge. But it's just something else I really appreciate about the game, that a lot of games taper off visually as you get towards the end. And make no mistake, as you can see from that barrier down there, this is the last area that you go to. But Hyperlight Drifter isn't that way. If anything, I think the southern area is potentially the most beautiful. Although that's a pretty clear 4-way tie, I think. All the areas are really pretty stunning. So here's an area we can't get into until we actually beat the southern area. That's something to keep in mind. We're going to be getting quite a mental list as we go through. Also, notice we saw Doog, which normally means we see the cool guy. Because this is the last area, they change up the order a little bit in the southern area, and I really appreciate it. Oh, cool guy. He does his function as before, telling us where some of the major modules are. And then gives us his story. Wife and kid both dead of the plague, leaving them as blue flowers. He saw Doog just as we did. That makes you wonder, are we destined for the same fate? Presumably he was hunting after a cure? Or maybe some way to end the illness the same way as we were? Anyway, we get a new outfit from it, so we'll have to try that on later, but rest in peace, cool guy. I like to think that these were 3 unbeatable sub-bosses that there's no way we would have ever passed, except that cool guy came and cleared them all out. He died as he lived, being completely radical and somewhat mysterious. Look at this little scorpion bros. So we see a lot of wreckage, a lot of robot machinery around here, and hey, here's the friendly guy for this area. Again, they kind of give everything to you all at once. And here he's highlighting the thing for this area. Instead of there being 1 major boss, there are 4 sub-bosses. 4 sub-boss robots. Now we'll be tackling the southern area as before in probably a series of 3 videos. We'll probably handle 2 of the bosses in the first video, 2 in the second, and then we'll do a cleanup in the third video. But yeah, evidently some serious stuff went on here. I almost read the southern desert as kind of a testing area or something. I mean, surely there was some kind of fight, but you see a lot of hovercraft around, and you could imagine some very mobile robot fights. I really like the rain, too. It just feels unnatural coming down in the desert like this. Notice your skeletons are around just as normal, so whoever was here suffered greatly, no less than anywhere else. So yeah, they give you the warp point, the cool guy, and your friendly guy pretty much right off the bat, let you into the main area. There are a couple places to go down and a couple places to explore. We're just going to start with this one for now. It is cool how, well, there's something else to remember. A 1 module door we'll come back and get. It is cool how, despite the underground being somewhat similar, you can easily tell both by the color palette used and by the kind of things you find which of the 4 areas you're in. So this is interesting. What looks like those guys. We've seen them in the arena before, but they have a shotgun blast, which is reasonably damaging at long range. And if you get up close, they have a remarkably quick melee attack, which does 2 damage. They're quite dangerous. I miss, you can go left, right from down that lower passage there and get to one of the monoliths, not the monoliths, but the tablets, you get translated, so I'll come back and get that later. But anyway, those 4 skeletons were interesting. They looked like skeleton models, and here we see some more of different kinds of enemies that we fight. So is this like are they worshipping them? Or is this some sort of prototype facility? It almost looks like the models that they would have in the entranceway of fabrication or tech companies that I've been in. Sometimes in the lobbies they'll have, display models of the kind of things they make. So are all of these monsters fabricated down here? Do they have biological creation? Are they able to do that? We're getting pressed upon by hordes and hordes and hordes of those little black buggers. So goodness only knows. I mean, are they, the clay from which these larger monsters are molded? We don't yet have any answers to that. But we at least see the goblins and the big leapers there. And here's something else to keep on our radar. We'll need to come back here once we have all of the keys. Fortunately, we've got all the keys we were able to get so far. And then, once we find all 4 from this lower area, we'll need to come back there. So that's 3 areas on our come back to list so far. There are a bunch of secret passages and a bunch of, appearing and disappearing blocks on this level. The fights, of course, are frenetic, basically, from the beginning. It feels like a good last level. You know, they give you a lot of challenges. Now there, I missed my big swing, but I did the leap attack, which did 1 damage, and pushed him into the wall, which did 2. I haven't used the leap attack just because I'm not good at it, but if you can knock enemies into other enemies or into walls, it's very, very good. Well now, what the heck is this? Just like we saw the enemy skeletons before, here we have Toucan, Newt, or Stoat, or whatever what those guys were, raccoons and lizards. So, and we saw a lizard buddy be up top. He was the friendly character from this region. So those are the 4 friendly characters. Are those also on the list of fabrications? Have they made everything down here? Or are they studying how to make them? Or what the heck is this place? The other areas we got different views of. So the north seemed like it was probably a big library underground. The east was a munitions plant. The west sort of seemed like a big jail, maybe combined with an armory, but with lower tech weapons for some reason. This place, I'm really getting the factory vibe. Notice those chairs and tables down there. They really look like they're containing fabrication equipment. It looks like you were meant to sit at them and churn something out through presumably high-tech equipment. It almost looks like a big sewing machine or something, you know, so maybe you knit together creatures with it or some such. Okay, here's our first key. More humanoid or drifter-like skeletons abound. So whatever those guys were, they were everywhere. They also love to throw those pop-up turrets at you in these levels. Now, you notice that secret symbol down there on the bottom. Anywhere that's inconvenient to get to, you ought to start thinking of as a secret in this game, just in general. I remember the first time I played through, by the time I got here, I did feel fairly well prepared to find most or all of the secrets. It's a skill to master just like anything else in this game. One almost wonders if there wasn't some assembly line thing going here where those shifty blocks were used for, you know, mashing stuff together, or you know, like hydraulic presses in a factory or something. That red symbol above the doors, take a look at it next time we go through one. I don't know if I recognize that. I don't know if we've seen that in previous levels. That'll be something to go back and take a look at. There you see the real weakness to the dash push, is that if you don't hit them into an enemy or into a wall, you only do 1 damage, which just frankly isn't that great. Those little green guys are flopping after us too, separate and distinct from the little black spiders. There's certainly no... Yeah, you see how quick that melee attack is. It's quicker about 50% of the time, I'd say, than charging up your big swing and using that. So you never quite feel safe just doing a little bit of damage, getting close to them and finishing them off like you can with most other enemies. You're quicker on the draw than almost any enemy in this game, and the fact that those guys are quicker than you is actually a bit of a shock this late. But hey, first major module. Always nice to see. Oh, that looks different. Oh, and indeed, it's a fake out. It's the first boss of the level. So all the bosses, I really like the bosses in this stage. They've all got some kind of trick. This one, in particular, has these little guys that he shoots out that fire a whole bunch of bullets at you. And I'm not doing what I should here, because the real trick is to stay close to him, because his little buddies tend to hover around him. And if you're close to him and the buddies are around him, you can get them all with a big swing. He will replace them, but not as quickly as you can destroy them. And so, you see here I'm sort of wasting my time flitting around far away from him where they get maximum spread. You know, they spread out, and so I can't quite take them down. They're real quick, and I'm just not doing as much big swings as I should have, and I'm out of stamina, or whatever you want to call it, special juice at this point. And so, I could, if I was preserving myself like I ought to, take them out. You can take them out with a grenade. It just is a bit harder to get the spacing down right. Again, because they flit out of the way. And there you see the wages of my bad technique. I am undone. So let's try that sucker again. See if we can't stay a little closer to him this time. The gun that you get from the western area is also a fine choice. It'll one-shot those little guys, so that keeps them off their balance. You see, though, that going away from him just tends to go badly. You know, you chase after the little guys, but you get close like this, you can even catch a whole bunch of them in just your regular swipes, which is what happened there. And even though he forced me away, he was down to low enough health that just a few more bullet things later, he dashes. He does get a dash attack eventually, but normally he just sort of floats around. So what I like about the bosses in this level is all of them are really hard unless you kind of figure out a trick. And you can figure out the trick just by kind of playing around with the fights for a while, and it makes them it makes the fights, while not completely programmable, because they're very mobile, you know, the bosses tend to be, it makes the fights really manageable. And so while they still feel like these organic experiences, you can really, you know, through observation and through mastery of Hyper Light Drifter's techniques, really get a leg up on them. That is in contrast, I will say right now, even though it's a bit of a spoiler to the final boss, who I'm actually not a huge fan of, and the reason is the final boss is basically a predetermined sequence of moves, and once you've just basically died enough to learn what the moves are in an exact order, the final boss kind of becomes a cakewalk. But there's not as much interaction between you and the boss as there are in these little mini-fights. These little mini-fights call on you to become a really good fighter and to learn to exploit weaknesses. And once you do, they reward you very quickly with, like, pretty easy boss fights. So the second time I fought that guy, it wasn't especially close. Whereas the final boss is kind of an all-or-nothing kind of fight. Don't get me wrong, it's a really cool fight. I mean, visually and everything else. You know, I don't want to go too much into it. Also, I feel like I should mention these enormous, horrible pairs of eyes. Hello, Peepers. These are the Peepers, and we'll see these Peepers again, and these Peepers will see us again. Don't worry on that regard. One wonders what they're there for, but one doesn't really question the Peepers too much either. The Peepers have always been, and the Peepers always will be. Yeah. So it's a small, subtle difference, and one that I think would be easy to miss, but it's just really significant for me. Anyway, here's this enormous crashed Space Hulk wreck. I love that they all hide badly. Look at him hiding below that block, like that's gonna work. I really didn't think they'd let me throw a grenade. I did not try to hurt you guys. Also, are they eating their own tails? I hope not. I hope those are scorpions, what they're eating. So there you can see that they did indeed find enemies of the kinds we've faced before being constructed within giant tanks, which is a bit troubling. Also, for sure, these lizardmen don't know what's going on here, or if they ever did, they'd forgotten. Here's the 8-module door. Yet another contestant on our remember to come back here later checklist. I like the little fungal growth or little stubby flowers or whatever those things are supposed to be. Oh, for heaven's sake. And yet another beat this area first. It's not so much beat the final boss as it is get the big pillar to rise up. And then they'll let you through. So, a lot to keep in your mind, a lot to juggle here. It was actually easier for me doing the Let's Play of this than it was playing it normally, because I think I ended up beating my head against the bosses a bit more on my first playthrough, and I forgot some of these areas, and actually never got back to a couple of them. So, I was glad I had the experience to quickly move through this area. Some areas are really easy to learn, and some areas are just harder, and finding my way around the southern area tended to be a bit confusing for me, the same way that the eastern area did. I don't know, maybe it's not the same for all of you. Grenades are lovely ways to deal with these guys, because while they're not as fast as your big swipe, while they're faster than your big swipe, you are certainly faster when you do your little swipe. If they're down to 1 health because they're a grenade, you just pop up and bop them right in the nose, and that's that. Also, many more opportunities to feel like a really cool guy by blowing their missiles into. I think that was a cool hit, even if I took some damage from it. So this is kind of crappy, I think, on the camera's part here. We'll see here in just a second. There is a secret to the south, but the camera just flat out did not cooperate with me. They set up the camera sometimes so it conceals secrets, but this one kind of feels like in bad faith. Notice the little imp head there. I don't know if that's meant to show secrets sometimes too. Maybe it only does in the southern area. It's funny, there are a lot of secret symbols here in the south, which is a kind of a funny way of getting around their promise to mark every secret with one of those little secret symbols, in that they've marked a whole bunch of non-secrets with secret symbols too. There's little secret symbols everywhere. It reminds me of a leprechaun story, where somebody caught a leprechaun and made him show him where his gold was and tied a ribbon around where it was. And he made the guy promise not to remove the tie, and when the leprechaun promised not to. And when he came back, the leprechaun had tied a ribbon around every area in the field. It's a dumb story, but that's folklore for you. Anyway, here's these tubes. That's what looked like what was growing the monsters before. And you can see either signs of a struggle or signs of partially assembled robots here. Judging from the blood trails, I'm guessing this was a struggle, so maybe the robots were interrupting monster production, or something else was happening. I like those futuristic file cabinets they've got there. I mean, clearly they're making robot parts on these machines here, so it's not at all clear what's going on yet. We know that they're making some big old peepers in here. That's about all we can say for sure right now. And Module 2, we're well on our way. We'll be at enough for a boss door, if there was such a thing, in before any length of time at all, actually. And basically, if you see an entryway with these little platforms, you ought to know by now that means secret time. One thing I will say is that these scrolling backgrounds that you get in some above ground areas, but mostly underground areas, do give you a sense of that you're in a giant area, but they are kind of lax on the details, so I'm not sure if we're supposed to be in a giant factory or if there's just crystalline type stuff going on below, or actually what's up. Notice that flashing light. They really want you to find this one secret. I'm sure that was there even before they started marking everything. It also kind of illustrates the factory-like appearance of these areas, and the fact that they still have these ancient runic monoliths down here is a little interesting. Maybe it's a Final Fantasy VI style magic tech thing going on. I could certainly dig that, and not only because I am a giant Final Fantasy VI nerd. Yeah, these tiny encounters now, you just feel like aren't really full challenges for a drifter of your stature. These missile guys, though, those will continue to be threatening for a long time. They can just pop out those missiles at quite a rate. Again, though, you do feel pretty cool cutting them in half. So maybe the green guys are the goo from which the goblins come. They certainly seem to be about that shade. You know, maybe the goo is refined within those test tubes and becomes larger specimens. It certainly would fit. And the question is are those made by the same forces that are fabricating these robots here? They kind of seem to be. With master over mechanical and biological technology, who could oppose them? The answer is raccoon crystal wizards. As indeed I think the answer should often be. They're really good in the southern area about giving you these big playgrounds with a bunch of moving parts to kind of dash around. Makes it really fun. And every time you activate something like that, it's a clue to go back a little ways, and they just hammer in for you that yes, you probably do need to backtrack by putting in some monsters. It's a neat little visual cue. And it makes sense if you've been paying attention. And believe you me, goons and YouTubers, we have been paying attention. Turrets aren't really that hard to outwit. They'll fire all 3 bolts in the same area, so as long as you are away from the first one, you'll be good. It just stinks if you get caught by one, because then sometimes you'll get chain hit. They track you a little tiny bit, but not really enough to be notable. And with all this sequential switch activation and block activation, you know there's got to be something good at the end of this. One thing I really like about the health packs is that, I think I might have mentioned something about this before, but they really keep the idea of dungeons as places where you need to be careful and conserve health. It used to be, I think, if you teleported, you would get all your health packs back, and I think some people even really wanted that to stay around. I'm actually not as much in favor of it, just because it means anytime you got back above ground, or anytime you got to going where a warp point would be convenient, it would just mean boom, presto, all your health packs were back just like that. And while that is convenient, it means that the dungeons were a little less threatening. And here I'm out of ammo like a big old nerd, so we're going to have to go elsewhere and collect a few more hits. That's not hard to come by in these dungeons. But anyway, I was saying as long as you're being careful, you'll really pretty much be inundated with health packs, at least on normal, and well, honestly, even more so in New Game Plus, just because you can't take as many hits there. Like, you know, I mean, you'll just die. Look at that big guy. I would not relish fighting that monster. This is what I said, they really don't slack off on visual design here in the southern area. If anything, I think it ends up being the most detailed. He was just kind of sitting by the edge over there. Hadn't even noticed the fun had started. I think that does it for here. With that, thankfully, we know where to go back to. And there's not so much backtracking. I'm not entirely sure what the distance triggers are for like enemies respawning and switches flipping back on and off. Obviously, switches change before enemies do, because you know, you can see all the enemies are still dead, but the switches need reflipped. Maybe the switches flip every time there's like a transition or something, and enemies are on a distance timer, something like that. It's not something, unless there's some crazy speed running strat that would require this, that I feel particularly compelled to really dig in and, you know, find out all the minutia about. Boy, it would have been embarrassing if you could have just dashed over to one of these things, but you sure can't dash down there. Anyway, you flip that and our conveyance arrives. Of course, not without some difficulties. You see, because he was facing away from me and not really ready, he wasn't charging up his melee attacks. How I got through that. And here we see quite a prize indeed, another major module. There she blows, solid 3, enough to pass through a boss door if such a thing existed. Don't really know what I was trying to do there. I guess see if anything spooky happened if you moved it back. As always, of course, if you happen to notice anything major that I'm skipping. I know I get all the main stuff, but I wouldn't even mind knowing where the gear bits are that I'm missing. The doubloons, the pieces of 8. So feel free to pipe up if you notice something I skip. Again, except for the tablet up top. I'll go back and show that later. Now here's a bit of an ARG moment for me. It's one of the very few design choices I don't much like. So you could dash up there and get something neat, or you could press this switch and these guys go away and you lose the opportunity to do that. You gotta completely traverse the dungeon again before you can dash yourself up there. But whatever, that's fine. I'll do that and, you know, show that off in a little clip later. Look at this. Some drifters, maybe? Managed to take down one of those Hulks, kind of Empire Strikes Back style. Fighting an AT-AT on Hoth, basically. Or Moby Dick style, harpooning it, I guess if you want to call it that. They put up a fight. Here we see true conveyor belts and further, you know, machine construction gear. It's sort of out of sync. I mean, you'd expect an enormous, completely mechanized thing, but this looks like it was meant to be manned by a few people. By skilled craftsmen, almost. And here we see guy number 2. This guy's trick is these little balls circle around him for a while and then he sends them out to hit you. I'm as terrible at hitting things as always. His trick is, though, when they're just circling around him, if you get the proper distance away, you can still smack them and they go back and explode right on him. He has a dash attack too, and he lowers some of the areas here. But if I had remembered it earlier, he would have been basically dead at this point. Because it's not like he launches them as soon as you start throwing them back. Here I remember it. See, as soon as they spin around, you can just smack him. You can get real close to him while he does that. So I sort of half remembered his trick. So I had a harder fight than I needed to, but it also finished up right quick. And that's 2 of the 4 down. Probably the 2 easiest in my estimation. The guy with the rice patty hat, who you might have seen earlier, is the hardest, again, until you know his trick, and then he's not so bad. Same as all these guys. We'll be tackling them in future videos. Man, check out this huge robotic assembly line. This place is armed for bear. But I really enjoy this southern level, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Look forward to showing off the rest of it in the next video. For now, it's time for a fever dream. I'll catch you next time. Maybe we'll see you. That's rude. That's rude is what that is. Get out of here, crows. Sick of you. Alright, thanks for watching, and I will... Whoa! Let's not fight that guy. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I will catch you next time.